Okay. So for those that are aware, I'm going to do a talk today on a couple different AWS security services that are out there that come with AWS. They're all part of the little package. Let me shut up my thing real quick. Hold on. How do I silence my Discord? Okay, there we go. Who here uses any AWS security services or that's familiar with it or whatnot? Any like anyone want to do a shout out?
I think just by me asking this question, what do you mean by security service in AWS?
So I'll share my screen here. So there are a couple different security services. There's Guard Duty, which I'll go over in a second. There is AWS Inspector, which I'm going to sneak into this doc. There is AWS Security Hub, and those are going to be the main ones I'm going to cover right now. Anyone familiar with any of those services?
Yeah, I'm familiar with these services and have configured them both on a personal level and at the enterprise.
Okay, cool, very cool. Um, so this might just be a recap for you. But yeah, those who want to follow along, I'm using a brand new account for this, just like kind of a throwaway dummy account. And just to kind of note that we are going to have to enable AWS config to get this demo to work, which if you have a lot of resources in your account could accrue a cost. So just kind of a heads up. I'm using a fresh account, so there's not many resources, so I'm not gonna really see a bump in my usage or my costs. But for those that are maybe a little nervous, you can set up a budget in your billing section. I set a budget of anytime I go over $1 or I'm forecasted to go over $1, I'll get like a text message or an email. So just kind of a heads up. Um, so what we're going to go over first is I'm trying to think, where should we start? I think we should start over at AWS Security Hub, because that's just kind of a generic kind of service that will encompass all the different things the rest of the things we're gonna talk about. So so for those that aren't aware, AWS Security Hub, it's a service, and let me load it up real quick so you guys can see. I'm just gonna do search for Security Hub in the AWS console. And what it pretty much does is it takes all the different AWS security services, including Amazon Guard Duty, AWS Config, Inspector, AWS Firewall Manager, Systems Manager, IAM Access Analyzer, AWS Health, Macy, and I think a bunch of others. And it takes the different findings that those different services can find, different sorts of security risks, things like that, and it'll put it into a single dashboard. And on top of that, if you're using AWS Organizations, which is another service that's free, if you have multiple AWS accounts within your AWS organization, you can actually view all your findings across all your accounts in one dashboard. So think of AWS Security Hub as a dashboard for all your pretty much your security health of your all your AWS accounts and the different EC2 instances that are in there, S3 buckets, and so on. So I'll kind of give a demo of how that works. There is a cost to it. I don't know if there's there's a 30-day free trial. So if you're using this for the first time, you won't get charged, but these are the costs of the different findings. Every time there's a finding, like if Guard Duty reports there's a finding, or AWS config shows that there is a finding, those you'll be charged per finding. It's like a fraction of a cent. And there's different tiers of those costs. So this page kind of gives you an overview of that. So I have two accounts. I have an account that's like really fresh. I'm going to walk through how to enable things. And then I have an account that's already been running for a little bit that already have some findings in there. So if you see me kind of jump around and you wonder why things are popping up so fast for me and maybe not for you, that's the reason why. So what we'll do is we're going to go and enable Security Hub. So we're just going to go right here, go to Security Hub. And if this is your first time ever using Security Hub, you'll get prompted to the screen. So in order for Security Hub to work, AWS config needs to be enabled. And let me give a good demo or a good explanation of what AWS config is. In kind of short, AWS config is a tool that will record changes within your account to resources, kind of like CloudTrail does, but it allows you to look at a individual resource in your account and look at the history to see when it changed and what it changed to over time. So you can use that for auditing or evaluating different configurations of different resources. And let's say you had a breach and somebody broke into one of your accounts and made a change. If you have AWS config enabled, you would see that those changes over time to your resources. So you have this nice visual trail. So we will, I believe we just leave this the way it is. We're not going to download this. If we were going to use CloudFormation to enable AWS config, we could download a CloudFormation template. So we're just going to skip that. We also, AWS Security Hub has different security standards that can be enabled by default. And for those that are familiar with like AWS fundamental security best practices, CIS benchmarks, PCI, things like that, they have specific guidelines and recommendations they recommend for setting up a AWS account securely and changing different configuration settings in a way that are deemed to be best practice. So what we'll do is we'll just go through and we'll just check these boxes for now to enable these checks within our account. And then from there, we will go and enable Security Hub. So this is enabled now on the account. I'm gonna skip this real quick, and I'm gonna go back to my other account that's has Security Hub already running, so you can actually see data, because it does take a little bit of time for data to populate. So on this other account, on the other account that's been running for a bit, you can see already that I have some findings. So you'll see on here, I have, let me close this out. I have 2 critical findings, 87 high findings, and so on. You can see the findings, what they are. I have 238 Security Hub findings, 163 guard duty findings, and 0 inspector findings. And this is the findings over time. And then these are the findings based off their severity, S3 buckets with findings, and so on. So this is like a dashboard that gives you kind of a brief overview of different security risks that are found in your account. And you might wonder why I have so many security vulnerabilities in this account. Some of them I've intentionally put in there, and some of them I've simulated with guard duty. So I'll go over that in a bit as well. So if we're on the left-hand side, and feel free to stop me and ask any questions. I'll stop real quick. Does anybody have any questions right now? No? Okay, cool. I'll continue. So on the left-hand side, if we go to controls, this will show our different controls that we enabled in the last section. Those were the CIS benchmark, PCI, and AWS security best practices. And as of right now, I'm not showing any failures or anything that hasn't passed compliance in that regards. If I go to see all the available findings, you can actually see these are all the different checks that those different like CIS and PCI and things will look for. So for example, S3 buckets should prohibit public write access. So if I had any public S3 buckets, this should show up as a finding, which as of right now, I don't have any that I'm aware of, and nothing's being found there for that. If you go over to, let's see, Security Hub, CIS benchmarks, and we look up on the AWS website, they actually have, if you're curious what all those different checks are and some details about them, the Security Hub documentation has steps on the AWS uh, foundational security best practices and all the different things that it checks for, or all the things that you should be doing to your account to lock it down. This is a really good read to kind of get a general idea of different, security best practices you should be following. So this is everything for that. These are all the different checks for the CIS AWS Foundation benchmarks. Same with NIST, if you follow NIST, and PCI. This is common if you're using any sort of holding any sort of payment card information in your accounts. So you can look through and you'll see, you got guard duty should be enabled. RDS snapshots should be set to private. And then you can click on one of these. So let's say S3 buckets should prohibit public read access. If we go into that, it will give some details about the severity, the resource type, which is a S3 bucket, and the rules, and things like that. So what we'll do is I did spin up some test instances, and I have this one instance right here that we're going to use for an example that has port 3389 open to the whole world. So that is just a something I did on purpose just to kind of show this as well. And I just spun this up shortly. And actually what I'll do is I will go and I'll stop this instance. And since this has been running for a while, Security Hub did find that vulnerability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this findings section on the left-hand side. And these are all the different findings that Security Hub has found. These are based off those default Security Hub CIS benchmarks and things like that, as well as guard duty alerts that I already have in, which we'll go over in a minute, and so on. So I am going to focus on things that are related to Security Hub. So if I go over to product name, I'm going to lock this down to Security Hub. Why is that not? Starts with, here we go. So now everything should be Security Hub only. We won't see any guard duty events. So if we go in here, we should see, okay, here we go. So I do have an alert that popped up in here that showed up as ensure no security groups allow ingress to 3389. So that was a finding that popped up. And this is pretty obvious. You don't want to open up 3389 to the whole wide world, because that means anybody could just, get into your server, especially if there was a weak password associated to the server or a known vulnerability, things like that. And you can see that it gives you information on what that the issue is, as well as the account it's in, the compliance status, which I think since I just terminated it, it went from failed to pass. You can see the resource that it's in regards to. So this is pointing to the actual security group, and not the instance in this regards. And then they'll give you a recommended remediation as well to how to resolve that. So it'll tell you pretty obviously just don't have 3389 open to the whole world. Let's see what other examples we have in here. EC2 instances should be managed by AWS Security Manager. Instances should be using the V2 metadata service version, and so on. Let's see if we got any other good ones in here. So I also did spin up some vulnerable Lambda functions, which we'll use for another demo in a minute. So I have these Lambda functions. And one of the recommendations it gives you is your Lambda function should be within a PPC as a best practice. Some will it's considered low. Some will say that's a risk. Some will say that's not. It just depends on your environment and your use case. So that did marked up as failed. And you can come in here and you can see, this is mostly based off NIST and PCI. It looks like in their guidelines they mentioned that lambdas should be within a VPC, which mine are not. And like I mentioned before, it's showing that it's failed compliance. And you can get some more information down here on the resource. So this was this SYNAC vulnerable code resource. And you can click on that, and then you can see all findings that are related to that AWS Lambda. So we have the Lambda should use supported runtimes, which it does, which shows why it's passed. The Lambda function should prohibit public access, which it does. So anything that's failed means there's an actual issue. Anything that's passed means that the issue has been resolved or it's not an issue at all. So just some things to keep in mind. We'll go over a little bit more about the different findings in a minute here. I'm going to jump into integrations. So Security Hub supports a ton of different services out of the box. Some of them are enabled by default as well. So AWS Config is one of them. Guard Duty is enabled by default, Firewall Manager, and several others you can see that are enabled. But there are other third-party ones out there. There are additional AWS services that can be monitored, and then there are third parties like CrowdStrike, for example. So if I come in here and look up CrowdStrike, you can see CrowdStrike Falcon has capability with Security Hub. So I'm not super familiar with Falcon, so I know Sponger could probably speak to this. But my best guess based off the description is any sort of finding that Falcon finds that's within your account, you can have those findings show up in your Security Hub dashboard. Is that correct, Sponger, or do you know much more about this integration at all?
Yeah. Yeah, this one might be with, it could be with our cloud security posture management, but also it might be I actually haven't set this one up, or it could be the agent that we deploy out, because we have a few different things that we can do in the cloud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, you can come in here. There's tons of different ones. See Barracuda, Stack IQ, Checkpoint, Cloud Guard. This is Cloud Custodian, which is a demo I did a couple months ago. And this is something that I played around with a lot. It's pretty nifty. There's tons. So those are additional things. I'm not sure what the process is on if there is currently not an integration that's supported by Security Hub, how you can go and get that added. I'm guessing it's if you work with AWS and you have a TAM, you can reach out to them about getting that add-on added into here. You could, my best recommendation if your app wasn't supported in Security Hub, I would look at trying to leverage Cloud Custodian to funnel the data into Security Hub, because Cloud Custodian itself is open source, and it's pretty flexible. Any questions at all so far? Cool. You guys are.
Yeah, I got a question for you.
Cool. What's up?
Okay, so I see a lot of stuff about detection, adding stuff to dashboards, visibility. Is there anything about automated mitigation or maybe like lockdown? Like, you found this, you got this great tool, it's scanning all your stuff, found something, and you might want a more nuanced approach to, like if you had that port open and you're like, we need somebody to kind of look it over and see if there's a better way, right? But if you're just like, oh my God, we got so much stuff hanging out there and it's a really high security, high rated vulnerability, we just want to like lock it down.
Yeah, it's good great question. So, yeah, so Security Hub can be used for remediation purposes as well. Something that I'm familiar with. There's a couple different routes you could go. You can use. You can write. There's nothing that's out of the box where, at least that I'm familiar with, where if a finding gets populated, you can have an easy way to like set up. Well, actually, maybe it's this. Is there a rule you can set up? I'm not super familiar with this specific feature. Um, okay, yeah, okay. This is kind of where I was going to lead down. So there's really no easy way that I'm familiar with where you can just quickly set a rule up and have it go and remediate something automatically. You do need to, leverage AWS config and like lambdas to go and take your findings from Security Hub and then go remediate against them. There is an open source tool by AWS. It's called AWS SHAR. I think it's. Let me see if I can find it. Security Hub. Oh, here it is, right here. It's automated security response. And okay, so this is. I think this is the one right here. So this is like this. They give you a guide on how to take your findings from Security Hub and actually automatically respond and remediate against them. And they have this whole entire implementation guide. I'll post it in the Meetup text channel. And from what I remember, they have it's a pretty good guide. It goes in everything on how the architecture works. It's got some cloud formation you can use to automate this, and using AWS config, which is kind of like the backend for Security Hub. You can have your findings be sent off to EventBridge, which could then trigger looks like step functions, which could possibly use like lambdas, things like that, to automatically remediate it. It looks like in this case, they're actually the Security Hub findings are actually triggering run books that are in System Manager that are doing the remediation. So for those that aren't familiar with AWS Systems Manager, you can have specific like scripts or run books. I think I'm sorry, my ignorance. I haven't used Systems Manager in a little bit, but you can have these scripts that can be triggered to actually go and take action. You have to write all those scripts by hand, so it's a little tedious. So this is one route you can go down. The route that I would recommend maybe is look at like a tool like Cloud Custodian to remediate against those findings, or even looking at like a third party like CrowdStrike, for example. I don't know where they are at with their automated remediation piece of the automated detection, but there's also there's other companies called Stacklet and Sonari and a few others. So those are some things to look at. But if you did want to implement it all within like a cloud AWS native approach, this is like a pre-built plan for you. So something to take a look at.
And I apologize if that was out of scope of your presentation, but
oh, that's perfect.
I feel like it was related. Yeah.
Yeah, it's related. So I want to go into, I'm going to break context real quick and show kind of like the back end of how Security Hub works in some regards, and that's in regards to AWS config that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to look up, see if we can find config. Here it is. So like I mentioned, config, all it pretty much is a resource recording system, and it records changes to every single resource in your account. This is the dashboard, and you can see that there are some resources that are already, there's some certain things that are already populating in here, because I have a couple of resources that are in the account. If we go down to resources, you can see every single resource I have in the account. And when I say resource, that can include that can be a bucket, that can be a IAM role, that could be EC2 instance, and so on. So if we look at, speaking of EC2, if we look at EC2, let's see if we can find it in here. Actually, let's switch the type to EC2. EC2 instance. Okay, so these are 2 instances, and they're not in compliance. I don't, let's see. So I'm gonna click on one of these. I'm sure I'll click on both these and open this up. I don't know why this is slow. So here's the instance. Its current state is stopped. And these are associated rules. And then where is, I'm looking for resource timeline. This is what I want. So this actually gives you that visual timeline of when things have changed with that with that resource, which in this case is an EC2 instance. So we can see I launched it yesterday at 9:41 because I was trying to prep for this very late at night. So you can see the instance was started. This is the run instance is the API call to start the instance. And then we have I stopped the instance a little bit later at 10:14 p.m. And then today at 6:30, let's see if I can get a good example. These are, I started the instance again. These are, by the way, these are different checks, rules that are being checked against this. So that's why you see these things popping up. So you can see I started the instance again. You can see some configuration changes, and it's just like Git. You can see a before and after. The parameters for the instance, how they have changed. And let's see, we got changes here, and then we stop the instance. So if we go over to EC2 and we refresh, you can see the instance is stopped, and this should be the correct instance. Yeah, it is. So this is the whole timeline. It's really good for auditing, especially if you have like a security incident, for example, and things like that. You can also come in here and create rules. So these are a bunch of predefined rules that are part of, these are all part of Security Hub. When I went and enabled all those conformance, all those different Security Hub packages, like the CIS benchmarks and AWS fundamental security best practices, things like that, it will create rules in the background and do checks against the resources to see if those are if those the resources are compliant to the rules or not. So if you click on one of these, you can see this is a API gateway cache encrypted. It gives you a description of what it's checking for. This is a detective only. You can have it detect, and you can also have it remediate as well, or take action. So you can see that there's some items that are not compliant, things like that. And I'm a little rusty on some of my AWS config rules, so pardon my lack of knowledge on this exact front. I don't use this day to day as much as some other people. But yeah, this is where you can have those detections from Security Hub go and react to the changes that you want. So if there's a detection, you can actually have them remediate through here, or at least change the compliance status. So that's a short little summary of kind of how this works. And that's kind of like the heart of how security works and the Security Hub works in the back end. I want to see if I'm trying to get this to show up. I'm not sure. Sometimes this takes a while for the rules to all run, but pretty much once those rules do run, and it might take up to 24 hours, you'll actually do get a security score here, and you'll see kind of where your overall health is based off your controls that you have, which are all the, like for the CIS benchmarks and things like that. You'll get a kind of idea of where you're at health-wise. So that's kind of a conclusion for Security Hub. I want to jump in over to guard duty now. So before I do that, any other questions?
Yeah, real quick, I may have missed it. Where did you turn on Security Hub?
When you launch it for the first time, you'll get like a go to Security Hub button, and you click on that, and then it'll run you through like a wizard to set it up.
where do you click it for the first time?
So you just have to go to Security Hub up here in the console, and when you, since I've already configured it, I won't get that that same splash screen, but your splash screen will look like it will just say welcome to Security Hub, and there'll be like a button that says go to Security Hub, which will take you through the step-by-step wizard that we showed at the very beginning.
It might even say like try now for 30 days or something.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for that.
Yep. So let me switch over to guard duty. And these are all related, which is kind of why I'm showing these. So guard duty, just to kind of give you a quick context, guard duty, what it will do is continuously monitor all the different AWS accounts, EC2 instances. As of recently, it'll even scan your databases, your serverless workloads like Lambdas, containers, things like that. And what it'll do is look for like people attempts to brute force into your instances or into your databases, things like that, and possible malware that could be running on the systems, and there's a whole list of different things like that. And this is the screen of what guard duty will look like. I think actually to go through this setup phase, which I don't want to beat around that real quick. If you go over to guard duty on like a fresh install of an account, the first time you're on here, you'll get this try guard duty for free. And this is kind of like similar to what you get when you're setting up Security Hub for the first time. You just go to get started. And then you leave. You can, everything by default is fine. You can't really change anything here. What it's mentioning is it's going to create a service role for this service to be enabled. So we can't really do anything about that here. So what we'll do is we'll go and enable it, and we'll get to the screen. This is what it looks like when you have a fresh install and you have no findings. I'm going to jump back over into my other account that has findings. And here you can see I have a bunch of different findings. And so you'll see, for example, this API get access key last used was invoked using the root credentials from this IP address. So this is saying that I signed into this account into this account using a root user, which I think I did this yesterday when I first set up the account. So you'll get severity low, the region that this happened in, the account ID, and more information. You'll get this IP address, which this is me through a VPN, the location, and so on. Some other examples. A lot of these are like dummy samples. There's actually a command I can share later that lets you generate a bunch of sample dummy findings just for you to use as an example or for you to test different automation. So you'll see a lot of these. You'll see a ton of different things in here. 163 findings. Most of these are dummy findings that I've added in here. So this is a good example. So we have this EC2 instance. This is the instance ID, which you can tell this is a dummy ID. Is querying a black hole domain name. So a domain that's it's been set to it's a black hole domain, which is pretty much means a domain that's been captured and sends you to like a null page. Usually, this is kind of like how WannaCry was stopped. They black holed the main WannaCry domain. So potentially malicious domain. So you can see this is the instance. This is the instance type. Outpost ARN. I think this might be the ARN for the instance. I'm not sure about that. The state that it's in. What else we have here? A bunch of other different information. It's just a ton of different information. The IP address, the VPC ID, and things like that. So if you're like working in a SOC, for example, you can get this alert, and then you can, depending on the severity, you can go dig into it and to see if this is an issue that needs to be investigated, or maybe reach out to a team that owns this instance. If you do tagging properly, you can see, if you have like the name of your team or an email address, then you can have those tags, use those tags accordingly. These are just dummy tags that are in here, so these are no good.
So
What else we have here? Let's see if I can find another good one. What's up?
yeah, I actually got an interesting use case that
Yeah.
I can talk about. So in one of my other roles or other jobs, it was interesting because we were using guard duty to send whenever we had like a guard duty alert, we'd send it to our Slack, and I'd get notified essentially like, hey, guard duty pinged an alert. We were running a Confluence server, and it was public facing, and so we found out that, hey, we got an alert saying, hey, this IP address is communicating with this Confluence server, and we're like, what the heck's going on? And so we looked at it, and it turned out that IP, we looked up on like IP abuse database, and like, hey, this is known malicious IP address. GuardDuty said it was malicious. We confirmed it, and it turns out there was an attacker from this IP address that was exploiting a remote code execution because one of the versions that we were on, it wasn't on the latest version, and so we actually had to patch it in order to kick the attacker out. But the attacker was trying to pull data from our Confluence, which is like a wiki. It was trying to pull data from like our public facing wiki that we had. And so what we had to do was I had to work with our engineering team to essentially say like, hey, like, like Sean said, like, yo, you work with your engineering team or whoever to figure out like what's going on. We had them like look at it, we monitored the traffic for a little bit, and then determined like, hey, we need to bring this server down. So we brought our entire wiki down, and we had to patch it, update it to the latest version, because we found out that there was a critical vulnerability in the code that came out like a month ago or something like that. But yeah, so that was, I thought that was interesting use of guard duty. The one thing I don't like about guard duty is that the information is helpful, but if you want to investigate it further, you have to have detective enabled. And so that's one of the things that I think is an issue with like AWS, is that, or not an issue with AWS, like I like AWS, don't get me wrong, but you have to have all of these services set up, like Security Hub, guard duty for your alerts on malicious connections, and then you have to have detective enabled to actually investigate them. And if you don't have them set up or well architected, then you could miss those alerts and you can't like dig into that further. So that was something like investigate with detective. That was something that we were talking about about using to investigate it further, because all this does is say, hey, there's this an alert, but outside of this data on the right hand side, I can't do any other digging into it. So that was a struggle for our team.
No, that's
Actually,
good point.
I have actually a related question. So let's say, you're in that circumstance and you find this thing like, oh, hey, this wiki is, somebody's getting into it, right? And, maybe they couldn't really exploit it, or they did, right? But maybe they didn't get the one page that somebody forgot. Oops, I put a password in there or something. What about like detecting like exfiltration? Like if you detected somebody actually was in there, like what did they get?
So yeah, and that might be something that AWS Detective may be able to assist with.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like we determined that they were able to, they weren't able to touch, like to download any of the files on the database, because we caught it fairly quickly. It was during the day our time actually when it happened, and it was like 2 o'clock or something. And so we found it. We're just like, what the heck? They weren't able to run like the remote code execution, but they were connecting to the instance. And so yeah, but to dig into that more, you would have to have detective, and unfortunately, we didn't have detective enabled. But my team was able to like investigate the logs on the actual Confluence server itself and determine like, hey, there was no like, it was an incident. It wasn't like a full on breach, but it was an incident.
Yeah, and a good point too. And that's something I'm not going to be able to showcase tonight, just because I don't have a lot of personal experience with it. But like Spencer was mentioning, like this will just show you potential findings that AWS deems as possibly malicious. but it will only give you this top high level information. AWS Detective, which is a whole other service, that can be used for, taking this to the next level, looking at correlating things with these findings with like AWS CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, um, um, and able to dive deeper into that and look for like root cause to the potential issues. So, yeah, good point. I'll continue on with a couple other things too for this. So, GuardDuty will it will look at your S3 buckets. It will look at EKS. It can run a malware scan of your file system of your EC2 instances. Um, it's got certain protections for RDS, which is the relational database service that AWS has, like for MySQL and Aura and things like that. And then recently announced, I think like last week, Lambda protections as well. This is brand new, and this has the ability to look to see if your Lambdas are being used in a malicious way. So all the findings that are showed up here on the side, if you have Security Hub enabled, they will also show up in Security Hub. So if we go back here to Security Hub, we'll have, let's get this come up, findings, and you'll see in findings, we'll have Security Hub, we'll have Inspector, we'll have GuardDuty should show up here. You can do a search for or filter by product. So I'm just going to type in product name, starts with guard. Why does this not work? Oh, is it case? It's case sensitive. Oh, there it is. So these are all the same findings we see on the GuardDuty page here, but over in Security Hub. And like I mentioned earlier, Security Hub is that single pane of glass for all the different security findings, whether it's GuardDuty, it's AWS config, and all these other services all in one place. So it's the same thing. You can come here. And like I mentioned too, is if you have this hooked up to organizations, you can have all your accounts send all their data into one Security Hub instance, and that way you can see that data across all the different accounts, whether you have one account or 1,000 accounts. So if I click on one of these examples, is domain related to known abuse domains queried by EC2 instance, this test ID, and it gives you very similar information. And you can even click here to be taken over to the GuardDuty page for further analysis. And all these different things you can have trigger through automation. As mentioned earlier, using like, for example, that automated security response system through the AWS offers. So that's GuardDuty in a nutshell. Any other questions about GuardDuty?
I got one other use case if you're interested. If there's time,
Yeah.
If not, we can jump into the other stuff.
Good.
Yeah. So GuardDuty. The other thing, like I saw, like in the alerts, it said Tor IPs. So that was another issue we had. Is we had a lot of web application traffic where users with Tor would essentially hit our application, and we couldn't figure out what they were doing because the traffic's encrypted. So this was like a risk to us, and so what we did is, again, like GuardDuty just alerts you on it. You still have to figure out what to do to stop this. And our solution for this was to set up application load balancers. Like there's regular load balancers that you can set up for your applications, but they don't have like any type of blocking, like real type of blocking. So we had to set up like applications which were more advanced load balancers. And we were able to specifically block Tor traffic to all of our apps. Like if there was any Tor IP, like known Tor IP, like just drop that traffic. And so that's like another use case that we had where we were seeing, it was concerning because it's just like, hey, if somebody's using Tor, they're usually going to be doing it trying to do something maliciously. So that was the other use case.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing that we had, the last sheet that we had is we had about 25 accounts in one of my last roles, and like Sean said, it's one thing to set this up for a single account. It's another thing to set this up for 25 accounts. Because if you have guard duty enabled in each and every individual account and you don't have it set up to like a master security hub account, then you're going to have to look in each and every single account to figure out what the risks are. And to manage that at scale is a nightmare. So they have like well architected infrastructure or well architected accounts where you have like your master account, which is your root account. You have a billing account, which is all the finance stuff. You have your security hub account, which includes all of your guard duty alerts, all of your inspector alerts for vulnerabilities. And then you have your logging account, which is for all of the CloudTrail and actions that are done through the APIs. And you don't just start like that. Like you don't just set up all your accounts and you're good to go. Like it takes months, if not years, to set up like a well architected account. If you come into like a role that has existing, 25 different accounts, or if you're starting from scratch, it's a bit easier to do it from like to implement that well architected security structure, well architected account structure from the get go.
Yeah, and actually speaking to that, it's a good point. If you are using AWS organizations, both Security Hub, which is this screen right here, and AWS Guard Duty has integrations with AWS organizations where you can actually go in here and bulk select all the different accounts that are in your organization and enable Guard Duty and enable Security Hub. You can do that across hundreds of accounts. You can do that across all the different AWS regions. And then you can actually set it up where new accounts that get onboarded into your organization automatically get Security Hub enabled by default. So those are some things that AWS is trying to make easier for folks. Because if you don't have those easy like toggles, you'd be left to do like AWS stack sets and things like that, where you have to automatically deploy like CloudFormation across all accounts. So
yeah, and the other thing is too is like what we had to do was even more manual than stack sets. We had to take trusted advisor reports, which trusted advisor reports are essentially reports that have all of the findings in your security hub, and it basically dumps them into like a 60 tab Excel doc, and then you have to run through them to basically investigate them and risk assess them, which was a nightmare and I hated doing. We looked through some of this stuff at least like once or twice a year, but it was really difficult to manage. So that's why there's other tools that are out there that if like there's other companies that are out there that specifically do cloud security posture management to basically make this a little bit easier, because the native services in AWS is like there's literally a service for everything, and if you want to do something you have to start the service, and that costs money, so it's essentially like a nickel and dime.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'll wrap this up real quick. The last thing I wanted to show off, and it was just really last minute, so I didn't actually get a chance to fully enable it. Is it's fully enabled. I didn't fully get to come up with a good demo of it, and that's AWS Inspector. It's a service that will help you find vulnerabilities in your EC2 instances, your containers, your Lambdas, and your Lambdas. They call them Lambda layers. It's like the packages or libraries that your Lambdas use. So this is the dashboard here. To enable it on a new account, if we went over to Inspector, looks like it's enabled by default. Let's see, go down to account management. Okay, I don't know. I don't think I did that on this account, but you just go and pretty much enable it. There should be a wizard. I don't know why it's not showing up on here. I don't think I enabled it on this account. But pretty much like I mentioned, it will call out different vulnerabilities that are inside your EC2 instances, your Lambdas, your containers, things like that, and they'll show them here on the dashboards. I was trying to go and create a couple vulnerable Lambdas. You can see my list of vulnerable Lambdas here, and I don't know if it's taking time for it to like scan it. It's usually pretty fast, or maybe the vulnerabilities I put in here weren't that good. I was just trying to put in some different things that would hopefully trigger the inspector to pop up findings. But if I do, I'll show some screenshots later. But you can come in here, go to by vulnerability. You can see I think I have one right now, which is port 3389 is reachable from the internet. This is one of the instances I created earlier, and this is just a basic vulnerability. But if you had out of date operating system running on the system, you get findings for that. If it's out of date like package or software on like an EC2 instance, you get notified for that as well. Lambdas, if this was working, you get notifications on if you're using any insecure code in your Lambdas. If there's any known like cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, command injection vulnerabilities, SQL injection, things like that, they'll pop up. They use actually a couple different partners, including Sneak. They use Bandit, which is like open source Python vulnerability scanner I showed a couple months ago, and they'll show the Lambda that's affected, and it'll actually show you which line the vulnerability is found, and then it'll give you like some recommendations as well too. It'll also tell you if you have a package that's either out of date or vulnerable. And then if you want to create suppressions to those, you can come in here and make a suppression to those. So if we wanted to suppress this port 3389 reachable from the internet, you can come over here. And where is it at?
And accept the risk. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Pretty much. I don't know why it's not showing up here. It's weird. Okay, I'm just blind. Create suppression. So you could do. That was a little bit easier. This is I think technically in beta, or some of the stuff in here is in beta, I believe. So you can pretty much create a suppression so that you can certain alerts you can get them to not show up. Like all the things we talked about today too. These findings will go to Security Hub as well. So we go back over to Security Hub and look in here so we got guard duty, do product equals inspector. We'll have those as well too. So you really can't miss any issues going on. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had for today. Before I wrap it up, does anybody have any other questions at all? Or things they want to see next time?
I was thinking back when you were talking about inspector and like scanning the OS and finding vulnerabilities, and then like software in the OSs or in the VMs. It kind of sounds like Nessus. Is it kind of like that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I don't know exactly where they're getting their like findings database from, but yeah, they pretty much are leveraging the SSM agent that's installed in the system. That's on, like, for example, on an EC2 instance, it's installed by default. They're leveraging that to collect software inventory and configurations, and yeah, it's pretty much like a Nessus that's just part of AWS. I don't know how. I'm sure Nessus is probably it has a lot more detail and information, and it's probably a little bit better than this. But yeah, it's like probably a very basic version of Nessus.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, it'd like
so-
show KBAs, right? Be like, oh, this KB or KBs.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was trying to spin up a vulnerable instance to show you that, but I couldn't get it to work. I should have just went on there and just like removed like an update to see if I can trigger it.
So this is actually something we were looking into too, as well, because we didn't have like my company was acquired, or one of my previous companies was acquired, and so we didn't have like essentially vulnerability management in all of our cloud infrastructure. So our goal was to essentially do scanning of all of our different accounts, like every IP, every like live instance that we could do. And one of the things that we ended up proposing was, because we had SSM agents on all of the endpoints, because we were using them for other things, is to just purchase Inspector, so then we could easily fill in the vulnerabilities. Because one of the issues that I've had with Nessus and like Tenable and like other scanning tools is they're a scanner. If you use Tenable, like we had Tenable, we do scans, and I'd set up the IP address, and you go and scan. You wait 8 hours, it fails, and then you have to troubleshoot it, figure out what happened, what went wrong, and then start over again. And that process can take days to weeks to figure it out. Whereas instead of doing IP scanning, like Tenable does also have agents, but we ended up doing like the agent deployment process for Tenable to get it on all of our EC2 instances. So we had some, I think it was like Terraform and like Salt, Terraform templates and some Salt configs to basically go out and install the Tenable agent on all of our EC2s that were spun up. And then through Tenable, we'd say, hey, like run a scan, and it just spit the information, the vulnerabilities back into Tenable, which was really helpful. So I've had one of my friends actually use Inspector, and they really liked it. But there were some limitations to it, like there were some false positives. And again, the dashboard is there's not much you can do with it as far as like building like reports and graphics and things like that. So I think Tenable and Nessus are like a better tool when it comes to like building out those dashboards. But if you have nothing in place, it's Inspector's like a start.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, if you've got nothing in place and you've
Yeah.
got no money, and yeah, cool. Good to know. Thanks, Sponger.
Yeah.
And thanks, Sean. That's good info to know.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
that
I
was
was
pretty
like
good.
I was muted and talked to myself here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Good talk.